Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says Pyongyang poses no imminent threat. But he's also been floating the idea of talks for a while now. His president, on the other hand, threatens the worst. Here's a look at how the issue snowballed to the point where both countries are at the brink of war. And who is to blame more for this state of affairs?
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury.
Fire and fury. Donald Trump borrowed from the Bible to threaten North Korea. But all that has gone up in flames so far is America's credibility. The response from Pyongyang was almost immediate.
North Korea was carefully examining the operational plan for making an enveloping fire at the areas around Guam using its domestically made medium to long range Hwasong-12 missiles.
It said it could bomb Guam, a tiny strip of land in the western Pacific Ocean roughly the size of Chicago, about 3,500 kilometers from North Korea. War is not an option between two nuclear powers, and yet both are talking about it. How did things come to such a pass? Look at the statements in the past 6 months. From saying all options are on the table to declaring the time for talks is over. From telling his cabinet that he'll handle North Korea to saying it will face power the likes of which this world has never seen before. Trump's critics say he's painted himself in a corner. His supporters counter that the policy of strategic patience wasn't taking America anywhere either. But hasn't Trump precipitated this? It's worth dwelling on what happened in January this year. Pyongyang proposed tensions could be eased if the US suspended joint military exercises with South Korea. In return, North Korea offered to suspend nuclear tests. Russia and China supported the idea. Even South Korea's new president backed the proposal. But Washington rejected it. The result was back-to-back missile tests by North Korea and more bluster from the White House. As things stand today, all options are unsavory, but talks without preconditions seems the most realistic one. Until then, perhaps Trump will turn to the Bible again for guidance and follow this. Bureau Report, WION. Joining us this evening, Jonathan Landay, national security correspondent for Thomson Reuters, with us from Washington, and Jason Yeo, journalist with the Korea Herald, with us from Seoul. Good evening to both of you. Jonathan, does America know how to respond to the situation towards which it has contributed to a large extent?
Well, one thing that I think is missing and is biased in the report that we just heard was the number of missile tests and nuclear weapons tests that the North Koreans have been conducting under Kim Jong-un, and the fact that he has declared openly that their objective is to develop an intercontinental ballistic missile armed with a nuclear warhead that can range on every part of the United States. That was missing completely from your story, and that is what Mr. Trump has been reacting to. Now, as you pointed out, however, that the Secretary of State has been walking back Mr. Trump's statement from yesterday, in which he says that not only is there no major threat emanating right now from North Korea to the United States, but that Americans can sleep peacefully at night. That's akin to saying, world, don't pay any attention to my boss, the President of the United States. I think that's where things are. I think the United States the administration is extremely anxious to try and tamp down the bluster and that was unleashed by the President of the United States yesterday, given that everyone, perhaps not the president himself, but everyone else understands the terrible and terrifically costly implications of a war on the Korean Peninsula. Any kind of American attack on North Korea and its nuclear facilities could trigger, and would almost certainly trigger, a retaliatory strike by thousands of North Korean artillery pieces and missiles. And don't forget, they have successfully tested nuclear devices on downtown Seoul that could kill more than 1 million people, as well as neighboring states of other parts of South Korea, Japan, and the fact that the United States has tens of thousands of troops posted in bases in that region, including on Guam, which is what the North Koreans have threatened to hit. I think right now what we're in it's almost like a schoolyard tiff between two young kids trying to outrank each other, out insult each other. But I think behind the scenes, there's a lot of maturity and a lot of effort to try and tamp things down.
The only problem is these school kids have nuclear weapons, and I'm not for one moment suggesting that North Korea is beyond reproach. But whether we like it or not, they have the nukes, and we know for a fact that they want to come to the talking table. Would it be such a bad idea for America to drop, at least publicly, the preconditions for talks and sit him down and discuss?
The other day you heard a modification of the American position as enumerated by the Secretary of State. Previously, several days ago, the American position was not only does North Korea have to stop its missile tests, but it has to freeze its nuclear program. When the Secretary of State offered talks the other day, he dropped the freeze on the nuclear program and said they have to stop their missile tests. So there has been a modification in the American position on talks. But let's not forget, the objective of the North Korean coming to the table is to get itself recognized as an official nuclear weapons power. And that's something that's simply not going to happen. They also want to have bilateral negotiations with the United States, cutting out the South Koreans. That is not going to happen. The mechanism that the United States prefers is to revive the so-called six-party talks, which are international talks that also involve South Korea, Japan, and Russia. In these negotiations on trying to get the North Koreans to freeze their nuclear weapons program. And finally, the fact is that the United States is not poised to whatever position you want to take. It's not poised to invade North Korea. You heard the Secretary of State say, I believe this last weekend or last week, that North Korea is not an enemy, that the United States does not seek to make North Korea an enemy. What this is an effort by Kim Jong-un, the young leader of this unbelievably authoritarian country, to secure his own power within his own country. That's what this is really all about.
Right. Let me take this question to Jason Yo. Rex Tillerson has been saying Americans should sleep well at night, not worry about the North Korean threat. He's also saying that there is no imminent threat from Pyongyang. Do you agree with that assessment?
I mean, currently, I agree with what Secretary Tillerson said. There is no current threat from North Korea. Like the South Korea Defense Ministry actually said today that there is no indication of imminent military provocation from the North. But experts say that it is very likely for North Korea to carry out another missile test in August, when South Korea and the United States will hold combined joint military exercise. So even though there is no imminent military threat, but it is likely that they will do something dangerous maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks later.
Jonathan, coming back to your schoolboy analogy, this is also a clash of personalities. Do you think at some level it has become more about this personal one-upmanship between the two presidents than a strategic conflict that the two sides are dealing with?
You know, I think both of them have domestic political agendas that they're trying to fulfill here. I've already talked about what a lot of experts see Kim Jong-un's objective being, and that is to secure his place as the leader of North Korea, of this authoritarian state that is encountering increasing economic problems, particularly because China has begun implementing the UN sanctions and says it's going to continue doing so despite the fact that it's going to hurt its own economy. On this side of the world, here in Washington, D.C. You have a president who is beleaguered by an investigation into possible collusion between his campaign and Russia. We know that it's moving forward very vigorously. We've had, we reported last week that there was a grand jury that's been seated now here in the District of Columbia that has issued subpoenas to people involved in the June 9th meeting between Trump campaign officials, including one of his sons and his campaign manager, Paul Manafort, and Russians. We all know today, a few minutes ago, it emerged that the FBI raided Mr. Manafort's home outside of here of Washington, D.C. 2 weeks ago, seizing documents. So he's beleaguered by that. He's also beleaguered by the fact that after a little over 200 days in power, he has really no major successes to point to at all. His health care effort to repeal and replace Obamacare has failed. He has been unable to get other major legislation out of the Congress. So he's looking for something to establish his credentials on. There's no doubt, however, that there's an agreement among most U.S. national security officials that North Korea does pose an enormous threat and growing threat to the United States, given the fact that it now is believed to have the ability to build an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile that can reach parts of the United States. There are still many officials who are not convinced yet that the North Koreans have succeeded in accomplishing some other very major steps that you need to do in developing a nuclear armed ICBM, and that includes developing a warhead that can withstand the enormous stresses of both launch and re-entry. And most experts that I know of within the American government don't believe that they've achieved that yet. However, as I said earlier, and I'm kind of digressing here, but President Trump is looking at a popularity rating of a little over 30%, between 33 and 36%. He needs to be reinforcing his position as a strong president, a national security president, and that's where I think this bluster that we heard yesterday come from.
Jason, to what extent do you hold the American president responsible for the current state of affairs?
Yeah, I think it will aggravate situation on the Korean Peninsula, because I have never seen any U.S. president, use such a harsh rhetoric on the Korean Peninsula. So it kind of like escalate tension on the Korean Peninsula, and it also provoke more stronger reaction from North Korea. And actually South Korean government is kind of like surprised by such a strong remark. So I think President Trump should refrain from using such harsh rhetoric to avoid escalating tension on the Korean Peninsula.
Jonathan, who do you think is going to blink first?
You put it, that's a good question. I think we've already seen both sides starting to blink. You have this conciliatory statement by Rex Tillerson trying to tamp down the tensions created by the president's comments yesterday, the fire and fury comments. But on the other side, the North Koreans have just released a Canadian citizen that they were holding. I believe he was a pastor, a Christian pastor, released this Christian pastor who they've been detaining. So there have been some signs on both sides that they want to de-escalate. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes. When you have nuclear tensions between the former Soviet Union and the United States, between Moscow and Washington, there are long established mechanisms that the two sides can use to talk and to de-escalate. Those kinds of mechanisms are not that well developed at all between North Korea and the United States. We suspected that there are discussions that take place in a channel between the two missions to the UN, to the United Nations in New York, and perhaps through the South Koreans and the Chinese. But there certainly aren't the kind of crisis management mechanisms that exist today, even between the United States and Russia, between the United States and North Korea. So it is a dangerous situation, as your other guest pointed out, but I think it's one that both sides are looking to ratchet down now.
Jason, the same question to you. Who do you think is going to blink first in this confrontation?
Yep, I think Beijing will do more over time. Even though Beijing is not doing their best to rein in North Korea's nuclear threat, but if North Korea continue to conduct more provocation and drive the situation on the Korean Peninsula to more dangerous condition, then China might be compelled to do something, because for them, the worst case scenario is the sudden collapse of North Korea, or sudden attack from the United States. So if the situation gets much worse and gets out of control, I think China will play its part. But currently, I don't think China will change their behavior toward North Korea.
All right, I'm not sure you got my question right, but the Chinese role, of course, is an important dimension in this conflict. I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks very much, Jonathan Landay, Jason Yu, for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us on this. Kim Jong-il, the father of North Korea's current leader, was once asked why he was spending his country's scarce resources on ballistic missiles, and this was his reply. I'm quoting, "I have to let them know I have missiles because this is the only way the US will talk to me." His son is now trying to tell the Americans that he can fire those missiles. The Kims have seen the recent history of Iraq and Libya, and the lesson they've taken perhaps is this: give up your nuclear weapons program and your regime does not survive. But that's not the only reason behind the open antipathy for the US. The banned leader of Western powers which orchestrate regime changes the world over in the name of upholding democracy. The Korean War of the 50s shaped the identity of that country. 20% of the population was killed. When the bombing stopped in 1953, the US never declared a full armistice. In North Korean eyes, the Americans still retain the right to attack their country, and they want a permanent peace treaty. But America refuses to talk. It flexes its muscle instead. So Pyongyang began to try to match the might. The first investment in nuclear power was made to offset energy shortages brought on by economic problems, and that was in 1994. Today it claims it can strike America. And at the heart of the standoff are two men who may appear very different and yet are strikingly similar. Let's start with the Korean leader. Little is known about the elusive North Korean Supreme Leader, as he likes to call himself, the youngest son of Kim Jong-il and his third wife, Ko Young-hui. Born in 1983, he wasn't seen as the heir to his father's legacy, but he was the president's favorite son and got a series of high-profile political posts. He was being groomed to take over clearly. Swiss educated like his brothers, Kim Jong-un avoided Western influences. He was called the Morning Star. The bellicose rhetoric emanating from North Korea is inconsistent with Kim's psychological profile. On the other side is a businessman and TV star turned president, embattled in domestic political crises, the very embodiment of the word unconventional, facing the prospect of impeachment in the first few months in office. There's a policy paralysis, some say, in America, with Trump hiring and firing his staff. He plays victim of the press, blames others for his problems. Abrasive, ambitious, unapologetic are some of the adjectives psychoanalysts have used to describe him. What is the chance that these two can sit across the table to avoid war? I'd say your guess is as good as mine. And as we head into a break, we are leaving you with images from 1942, the year the Quit India movement was launched. At the Bombay session of the All India Congress Committee by Mahatma Gandhi demanding an end to British rule. This was in the middle of the Second World War. Almost the entire leadership of the INC was imprisoned without trial within hours of Gandhi's speech. Most spent the rest of the war in jail.